Hello, Eva. Welcome
Hi,
to the
Karen.
show.
Thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be here today. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being my guest again. It's really lovely every time we talk. And I also wanted to say thank you, particularly you recently had a COVID
Yeah,
sickness. So thank you for, despite that, coming onto the
I'm,
show.
I'm still here to tell the tale. Yeah, definitely. And it's great. It's great to be here. And as you mentioned, yeah, I had COVID. I started symptoms about 2.5 weeks ago. I was pretty much in bed for about 2 weeks, but back working this week, which I hadn't planned to do because I thought I'd be finished up for Christmas by
Right.
now. But here we are, and still working away, and happy to do so. But yeah, still
Wow.
have some of the symptoms, but for the most part, um, I'm over the worst of it for sure. And I'm glad to get it out of the way so that I can celebrate the holidays with my family. And I mentioned just before we started going live that I'm traveling to Tenerife in January for a month to do some remote working from there. So I'm glad to have it out of the way, so to speak, before I go there.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a perfect segue, as we will be talking a lot about traveling today.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
first, there might be people who do not know you yet. And so I've asked my guests to please introduce themselves with some facts according to the working out loud method.
Absolutely. And there's probably a lot of people who don't know who I am. So I'm happy to share. And I did write down some notes just to kind of help me and give me a bit of a prompt around, like, who am I? What are the kind of things in this method? I really like this kind of human centered approach. My name is Aoife O'Brien. So for anyone, you'll see it typed up there. It is an unusual name in that anyone outside of Ireland, I think, doesn't know how to pronounce it. But I say to people to read my name backwards, like EFA, and that will kind of help them to know how to pronounce it. And it's given that we're talking about travel, traveling around the world with a name like that caused a few issues. Let's say people just didn't have a clue. And living abroad and living in various different places, people did not know how to say my name. But a few facts about me: I love baking, and especially during the pandemic, I learned how to bake loads of new things. I don't want to sound like too much of a cliche, but I did learn how to make sourdough bread. I had to make the starter. I learned how to make cookies. I made Jamaican ginger cake and banana chocolate chip muffins. All of those all delicious. But I live by myself, so it's probably not ideal for the waistline. I absolutely love doing jigsaw puzzles as well, and I'm a real problem solver by nature. I love doing board games and all of those, anything that requires a little bit of strategy. And it kind of ties in nicely with my background in my career. I always worked in data and analyzing data to solve problems. So I'm that kind of, like, that's how my brain works. I love doing those kind of escape rooms and things, even if they're the online version now that we're in the, still restricted with what we can do and things like that. But I love doing all of those types of things. I have one niece and one nephew. They are in Germany for Christmas. My brother's married to a German woman, and they flew yesterday to Christmas, so we won't have them around for Christmas. She's 6 months and he is 2. And I am the founder of a business called Happier at Work and a podcast of the same name. And I know, Karen, you were a lovely guest on my podcast as well last year, and probably around this time last year. And we did a LinkedIn Live because I remember wearing our Christmas hats and everything.
Yes.
So it was very exciting.
Yes.
The podcast has been running since August 2019. So 2 years and 4 months or thereabouts, and about, I think, 85 episodes. I think now I had to skip an episode because I was sick. So I was like, I'm not putting myself under pressure to record and to put something out there when I really don't need to. And I think if I were to take some lessons from having had COVID, like, that is the thing, I felt like I was really busy coming up to Christmas. And actually, if I think about what I did get done, which is pretty much nothing in those 2 weeks, and in this week, I'm trying to take it as easy as possible. And the world hasn't ended. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it just goes to show we put so much pressure on ourselves to get things done when actually other people don't necessarily know that we're doing all that stuff, that it's all going on in the background. And I'm still here to tell the tale. And the like I say, the world hasn't ended. It's not brain surgery that I'm doing. It's not a life or death situation. And the fact that I couldn't work for a couple of weeks and that I had to rest my body, and the brain fog that I got was just, what day is today? And you can't think of stuff. And it was just pretty horrendous. But it just, I suppose, goes to show that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to deliver when other people's expectations aren't necessarily the same as our own.
That is such a good, lesson, or experience you had in that respect. You're absolutely right. It's, and especially during the Christmas and holiday season as a whole, I've noticed also that this year in particular, there are many more out of office kind of messages on LinkedIn in particular, saying see you after the break or see you in the new year. And I think that's really important, especially as we are here now 2 years into the pandemic, really, to have a break. And
absolutely. This is it. And like, it made me think that next year I need to be like, my words that I'm taking into next year is intention or intentional. And I want to be more intentional about the breaks that I take next year, rather than waiting till a time when I really, really need one. It's like building those breaks in advance so that it's not that I had burnout, but my body certainly at that stage needed to rest anyway.
Yeah. And, you mentioned you're going to travel next year to Tenerife. So I'd love to hear more about it a little bit later. First, I'd love to understand. So when you were starting your career, did you ever think about, living abroad or traveling extensively?
Interestingly, I've traveled since I was quite young. My dad was a pilot. He's retired now, but I always was kind of interested in travel. We always traveled quite a lot when we were kids as well. And throughout university, I spent time living abroad. So I spent a summer living in Frankfurt in Germany, actually. One summer. I spent 2 summers in the States, one in Montauk in Long Island and another in Chicago. And then I had a year abroad in Barcelona as part of my Erasmus year as well. And that was even, that was all pre-starting my career, and really, really enjoyed those experiences. And then I suppose when I started working, I always had in my mind that I would love to live in London. So I'm from Dublin originally, and still living here now, or back living here now. But London is kind of like, let's say, the bigger city, the big smoke compared to Dublin, whereas other parts of Ireland might consider Dublin the big smoke. For someone from Dublin, it's like, what's bigger than Dublin?
Right.
Would be London. And for a long time, I talked about living in London, moving to London, all of those kind of things. And actually, I got to a stage where I realized that no one was going to move with me. I assumed that this is what everyone wants out of life. They want to go and live in a big city and kind of live that kind of lifestyle. And I realized that no one was going to go with me. So I have to go by myself. And so when I was 27, I moved over to London. And when I told my friends, they said, oh, it's about time. You've been talking about that for long enough. And it goes back to this idea that I thought that that's what everyone else wanted. And I was just waiting for someone to kind of grab me by the hand, if you like, and say, come on, we're moving to London. And I decided to go on my own. And I think the big lesson in that is that you don't have to wait for other people to do, or not everyone wants the same things that you do out of life, and you don't have to wait around. And I think as soon as that happened, it made me realize that I won't wait around for other people to do what it is that I want to do. And that was the huge lesson to come out of that. Like, I waited for so many years on the assumption that other people wanted the same things. So I suppose for a long time, I was very interested in living abroad. And when I was going to London eventually, the idea behind that was to make money, because you could make more money in London, earn in sterling, and then travel and live in Australia, which is kind of like, it's kind of like the done thing. It's like a rite of passage here in Ireland. Like, a lot of people spend time living in Australia, traveling, if that's something that's of interest.
Mhm.
So yeah, it very much was kind of part of the bigger plan, if you like.
But it's so interesting that you say, that you learned from this already.
Yeah.
It's, don't wait for somebody. If you are interested, just go ahead. And even if this isn't a typical thing necessarily for everybody. And now you mentioned, so you traveled then around and, Australia, like, can you maybe share a bit more what kind of transferable skills you've learned from doing that?
Yeah. Well, so so I lived in London I ended up staying there actually for 3.5 years, which was much longer than I had anticipated, but I absolutely loved living there so much. And the only reason I left was the rules around the Australian visa were a bit funny. You had to apply, I think, before you turn 30 and then arrive in the country before you turn 31 or something. There was some crazy kind of rules around it anyway. So I did that, and that meant that I had to leave London earlier than I would have liked. And I think they've changed the rules now. Of course, it's like 35 or 36 or something, typical. But I traveled initially around Southeast Asia for 5 or 6 months. I started off with a friend for 5 or 6 weeks. We traveled together, and then she went on to Australia earlier because she had applied for her visa before I did and needed to activate it and stuff like that. And I suppose for me, like, so many skills, it's the planning, it's the budgeting, it's the communicating with other people, and you kind of having that social awareness that you're not taking risks that are too high, but you're also not taking any risks at all, because you need to be able to travel around. You need to be able to trust people and that they have your back and that they are looking out for you. And like, there's so many instances of taking public transport there where you don't speak the language. And there was one time where 3 of us together bought tickets for an overnight bus in Laos, and we arrived at the bus station later that evening to take the bus. And there was a guy, and there was myself and my friend, and he somehow got onto the foreigner bus, let's call it, because there's the foreigner bus and there's the local bus, and they said they had no record of our booking, and we ended up on the local bus, and we got dropped in the middle of nowhere then. Whereas we met up with him subsequently, and he got dropped off in somewhere that was much more central with lodgings and hotels and guest houses around, whereas we got dumped in the middle of nowhere with, it was pitch black, it was the middle of the night, and we started having to knock on doors, just experiences like that. And I guess it teaches you a bit of resilience as well, because you can't get bogged down with like fear and what's going to happen. You have to just pick yourself up and be like, right, we're in this situation, what do we do? And we just knocked on doors until we found somewhere overnight. The next morning it was bright, we could see then, like, this is where we are. And actually it was the other side of town, across a big kind of field, is where the main tourist area was, and where we should have been dropped, but we weren't. But yeah, it's just little things like that, I think. And then, so that was kind of the travel, and it's like I said, the planning and the budgeting and having that level of self-awareness and social awareness. But then living abroad as well, like living in Germany for the summer that I mentioned, and just interacting with people from different countries, and being curious about them, about their own background, about their traditions, and about their, because when I worked in Germany, we worked with people from all over. They were from Eastern Europe. There were people from Nepal, like lots and lots of different countries, and maybe 1 or 2 Germans as well. But I think the Germans were kind of more the management. And then similarly in Australia, there were people from Australia. There's a lot of people from the UK. There were people from Singapore. There were people from lots of Asian countries as well. So it's kind of, I suppose, having that understanding of like, not everyone is the same as you, and going in with this level of curiosity rather than judgment about what it is they're doing and how they're approaching things.
That is so interesting. As you know, I've lived in different countries and I've traveled as well. And I feel this, going out of one's comfort zone, like on a daily or multiple times a day, from looking at food that one might not recognize.
Yeah,
And yeah, I think
it's so true, Karen. And I hadn't even thought of that. And I think at this stage in my life, in my career, I probably spent a lot of time stretching my comfort zone and going out of my comfort zone. And I think the first couple of times you do that, it's scary. But when you do something and you do it on a repeated basis, then it becomes less scary, and that you're stretching that comfort zone. So now your comfort zone actually encompasses those things that previously scared you. And exactly like you say, the food, like some of the food in Southeast Asia, we'd visit the markets and you wouldn't know what some things were. You know, and I tried different like bugs and things like that. I ate street food. I got when I was traveling around Southeast Asia, I got food poisoning 3 separate occasions. So learning to deal with that as well. So the first time I think was with a friend, but 2 subsequent times I was on my own, and you're just basically in a guest house in a room on your own between the bedroom and the bathroom. Essentially, when you have food poisoning, there's not much else that you can do. You need to try and get some food in and things like that to keep yourself hydrated, keep yourself fed. But yeah, you know, like talk about being out of my comfort zone. That certainly was, and having that resilience to be able to bounce back as well.
right. And the courage to keep going and
And
saying,
yeah, wow, yeah, the courage to keep going as well. Yeah, rather than, and that kind of sticks in my mind actually when I was going. So I lived in Australia for a year and a half. I traveled extensively while I was there. I traveled around New Zealand as well. And on my way home from Australia, I traveled around the States and a little bit of Canada as well. I went to Fiji. I went back to New Zealand to visit friends. I went to Hawaii then and met up with some family there. My parents flew out to meet me. It was amazing. And I traveled, like I say, in parts of Canada. I went, where did I go? I went to Whistler, and I went to Victoria, and I went to Vancouver and Montreal in Canada. And then I went, sorry, yeah, this is not then, because when I was on the West Coast, I traveled from San Francisco down to LA, and I went to Denver, and I went to Seattle and Portland. And then I went to New York, down to DC, and Philadelphia as well. Like, I just traveled so much while I was there. I came home for Christmas, and I made the decision at that point that I was going to travel some more. And so I did this very scary, you know, I was really like, South America, the perception I think is that it's really dangerous and there's loads of drugs and things like that. I think the outside perception is that. And it was something I knew I wanted to do. And I kind of thought I had to do this on my own because I didn't know anyone else who wanted to go. So I remember distinctly before that I was so afraid of going, but I still, like you say, I had the courage, and I went anyway. So I traveled back to New York. I went to Miami to visit a friend, and then I flew to Buenos Aires. And exactly that, like the entire time, my mom said, if you at any point want to come home, that's no problem. You just hop on a flight, get yourself to America, and then fly back to Ireland. You know, it's not the end of the world. And so with that in the back of my mind, it did take me a couple of weeks to settle in. I do speak Spanish. It took a while for it to come back to me. But I spent 5 or 6 months then traveling around South America. And that was an incredible experience as well.
That's, it's, I can so relate. I was in Mexico and Belize for about 3 months in total by myself. So yes, I can completely relate. Courage, I think, is the right word. And so now, when you reflect on this, what would you have liked to have known before you did all of this traveling and living abroad?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I think going back to my earlier point about when I moved to London, I think if I had moved to London earlier, that probably, like, if I hadn't waited around for someone else to take me, then I would have moved to London a lot sooner. And I think I could have done that. So that's kind of lesson number one, if you like. Another one was that while I enjoyed traveling on my own, I think the best experiences that I had were those shared experiences. And I did meet some people who are lifelong friends on my travels. And when I had shared experiences with them, like it was just really, really nice. And I think that that's one of the beauties that you can, it's not just your own experience, that you can look back and you can have a chat with someone about a shared experience that you had. So I think bear that in mind. And you don't always meet people that you necessarily connect with. And there were certainly loads of periods of time where I was quite lonely. But I think if you're feeling that way, then you just, again, need to get out of your comfort zone, have the courage, go out, go to a bar, go to a restaurant, go to somewhere where backpackers hang out, essentially, and just get chatting with people and make friends. And certainly before I went, one of my friends said, I would have been 30 at the time, I think, but when I was speaking to her, I guess I was around 29, and she was like, oh, like no one has ever seen a 29-year-old backpacker, when in fact you'll find that people, the range of ages of people who are traveling, who are kind of have that nomadic lifestyle almost, or even just taking a year out or 6 months or 2 years or whatever it might be, actually the range in ages is so great, from straight out of school and to people in their 60s and 70s, like, so don't let anything like that stop you. I think where I was a bit on the defensive because she had said that, but actually when I started traveling, I saw that there's such a variety of people who actually do that.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and it's such a diverse group of people
Yeah.
that travels. And so I really appreciate you sharing your story, because I feel it's so important. Somebody who might be in HR or a business leader listening to you and hearing all the skills that you have learned. And so the next time somebody sees a resume and they might say, a year or two traveling or working abroad, what these skills are that have been, gained by doing this. And
yeah. I must check actually on LinkedIn, because I know that they've added, and I know because of you, Karen, that they've added this stay-at-home care and things like that. I wonder, is there an option for travel? And interestingly, when I returned to Dublin to start working again, that would have been in 2013, a friend of mine had to point out to me that, think about all of the skills that you gained, and the way that I approach things will be completely different because I've had these experiences, and how I interact with people, how I communicate with people. Like, don't downplay all of those additional things that you have because of the experiences that you had, and really big those up on my CV. So it's not just that, like, oh, I spent time traveling. It's I gained this skill and this skill and this skill because of the experiences that I had while I was traveling.
Yeah, it's so important. And I was reading this quote the other day where basically, especially if you've returned, say, back to your own country or town, for other people, you might appear to be Eva like you were before.
Exactly.
But for you have changed, you have grown, you have, expanded your experiences. And I feel it is important to let people know about, especially when applying for a new job.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So don't discount it. And like I say, I must check on LinkedIn to see, do they have that option? And if they do, then I'll add it. I think I mentioned it somewhere along the way, like in one of my experiences, I say after a period of X number of months or X number of years of travel, I started this role just to kind of give a better understanding. But I need to kind of big it up a little bit more, I think.
I think so. I mean, just what you described in our conversation today is amazing. Yes.
Yeah.
And given the whole COVID situation, I don't want to keep you too long, but I'd just love to know. So you're going to Tenerife.
Yeah.
And so, like, how will that compare to what you have done previously, you think, as far as the traveling aspect?
Yeah. Again, another really great and interesting question, Karen. I wanted to take a sun holiday. Like, I'm sure it's similar where you are, but the wintertime, the days are short, it's cold, it's wet, it's dark, and it's not it's not entirely pleasant to be here during winter. And I thought I'd love to take a break sometime, maybe in November. And a friend of mine was going to Portugal for a month, and she was saying, "Oh, I'm going over here, but I'm going to have friends visiting." She's rented an apartment, and she's going to work from over there for a month. And I was telling her about, like, "Oh, I'd love to go like somewhere like Tenerife, where I know it's going to be warm that time of year." And she goes, "Oh, well, I was thinking of going to Tenerife actually in January. And what if you came with me and we rented a place together, and we could do some co-working or remote working from there." And so I just, after a few discussions, we just said, "Yeah, let's just go. Let's book it." The flights were quite reasonable. The weather is going to be like 23 degrees compared to like 5 or 6 degrees probably here, or even lower. It could be. And so, yeah, so we decided to go. And I suppose the big difference with that is, when I was traveling, I wasn't working. I saved up my money. And if you want to know my philosophy around that, is I always like to save more than I need and spend less than I have. And so people think I won the lottery or something, but that's my whole philosophy, is you save the money that you need to go traveling, and then you spend less than you have. Like, it's not as if I was living it up in hotels. I was staying in hostels, backpackers, guest houses, that kind of thing. I was eating cheaply. And so the difference with Tenerife, and I've never really done this before, it's kind of like, let's say, an extension of COVID. Like, I mean, I'm working from home here anyway.
Right.
So when I'm in Tenerife, I'll be working from home in Tenerife, much warmer climate, cheaper living expenses, all of that kind of thing. And probably reduced working hours, and again, taking the lessons from COVID, from those 2 weeks of like, what's a real priority here? What do I really need to get done? Rather than creating busy work for myself, I can take more time in the day to get out and enjoy the sunshine, to go for a nice walk, to go for a hike, to go for a swim in the sea, all of these lovely things. Go out to a nice restaurant, enjoy some wine on the balcony in the evening, things like that, rather than focusing just on, work, work, work.
Yeah, it is so interesting, because what you're describing is, I feel, many more people will be, doing remote work in
Yeah.
the future, and in what you just described, like in a co-working manner somewhere else.
Yeah.
And experiencing, by doing this also,
Yeah.
different cultures. And
Exactly.
so it'll be really interesting. And I'd love to catch up
Yeah.
once you've done this, to understand
Absolutely.
what you've learned from that.
Yeah.
So,
And interestingly, I have on my list of things to do for my podcast for when I return from Tenerife, is to do a podcast all about the lessons that I learned from what I did.
yeah. And I just think it's, it sounds really interesting. And yeah. And sunshine, I have to admit, I've lived in Arizona for 14 years, and I feel in that time I probably accumulated enough sunshine for the rest of my life. So I'm actually reasonably happy with rain for most of the time. Yes. So, well, is there anything else, Eva, that you would like to share with our viewers or listeners today?
Yeah, I think really, if anyone would like to connect with me, I'm always open to connecting here on LinkedIn, or if you're listening on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'll spell out my name, because, like I say, it's a bit unusual and people don't always get it. So it's spelled Aoife, O''Brien. And so I'm always open to connecting. If anyone wants to know more about what I do, something we didn't talk about today, actually, we touched on courage and getting out of your comfort zone, but something I speak a lot about is this idea of imposter syndrome. So I have 2 websites, if I share both. One of them is impostersyndrome.ie, and that's imposter spelled with an E, and that's all one word. And then .ie is the code, the URL, I don't know, whatever you call it, for Ireland, much like .ca would be for Canada.
Right.
And then my other website is Happier at Work, again, all one word, happieratwork.ie, and you'll find links to my podcast from there as well, and my services.
Thank you so much. And I will be sure that once it is a podcast episode, it'll, I put it in the show notes. And then after we finish talking now, I will put it also in the comments. So people
Brilliant.
who are interested can, click on that.
Fantastic.
And it's been such a pleasure talking with you again.
Likewise.
Eva.
I always love our chats, Karen.
Yes,
So
yes.
turns out to me.
And I really hope that next time we talk, you will feel even better after COVID.
Oh, too.
Yes.
I hope so too. Yeah.
And I'm just gonna put in as the finishing slide how people can find the podcast. And I'm sure we'll talk again in the new year. So thank you again, Eva.
Thanks so much, Karen.
Bye.
Bye-bye.